A cold, eerie silence surrounded the deep sea, where light had never touched. Strange creatures, glowing in the darkness, had lived here for millions of years, undisturbed. But now, something was wrong. Fishermen along the coast of Japan, Norway, and even the United States were reporting bizarre sightings. Giant squids, jellyfish the size of cars, and glowing fish washing up on shore. These creatures weren't supposed to be here. They belonged to the deep, thousands of meters below. Scientists were puzzled, but locals feared the worst. They believed it was a sign, a warning that something terrible was coming. Reports kept increasing. Tourists visiting the beaches found themselves face to face with monstrous fish with razor-sharp teeth. Some creatures were still alive, their bodies pulsing with an unnatural glow. Biologists rushed to study them, but the creatures were dying fast. The only clue they had was the ocean itself. Something was forcing these creatures to leave their natural home. Some blamed pollution, others climate change, but a few believed in a more terrifying theory. Something was lurking in the depths, pushing them out. In a small fishing village in the Philippines, an old man sat by the shore, watching the waves. He had seen this before many years ago. "The sea is angry," he whispered to himself. "Something is disturbing its balance." His grandson laughed, calling it a superstition, but deep down, even he felt uneasy. He had seen the strange creatures with his own eyes. The question remained, why were they coming to the surface? And what were they running from? Across the world, marine scientists scrambled to find answers. Amelia Carter, a renowned oceanographer, had spent her entire life studying deep-sea ecosystems, but nothing in her years of research prepared her for this. She stood in her lab, staring at a massive, bioluminescent squid sprawled across the examination table. It had died just hours after being found on a beach in California. What puzzled her wasn't just its unexpected presence, it was the deep, jagged wounds across its body. Something had attacked it, something big. Meanwhile, in Norway, a submarine team set out to explore the depths of the North Atlantic. As they descended past the twilight zone, their sonar picked up unusual movements, large masses of marine life rising towards the surface. The deeper they went, the stranger it got. Normally, the ocean became quieter as they descended, but this time, they heard a sound, a deep, rhythmic hum that sent shivers down their spines. It wasn't the sound of whales or underwater currents. It was something unnatural. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Was this the reason the deep-sea creatures were fleeing? Back in Japan, a group of fishermen refused to go out to sea. Their ancestors had spoken of a time when the ocean would turn against them, bringing unknown horrors from below. Some believed it was a natural disaster warning, while others whispered about an ancient force waking up. Legends of deep-sea monsters resurfaced, and fears spread among coastal villages. But this time, it wasn't just folklore. It was happening. The deep-sea creatures were running from something, and soon, the world would find out what. As days passed, more deep-sea creatures appeared in unexpected places. In Australia, a colossal oarfish, known as the messenger of the sea gods, washed up on the shore. In Brazil, beachgoers spotted a swarm of deep-sea jellyfish, their glowing tentacles pulsing in the shallow waters. These creatures had survived for millions of years in the deepest trenches of the ocean. So why were they surfacing now? Social media exploded with theories. Some claimed it was due to climate change, others blamed pollution, but a growing number of people believed something darker was at play. Amelia Carter and her team studied the rising pattern of these incidents. A chilling discovery emerged. These creatures weren't randomly surfacing. They were running from specific zones in the ocean. Satellite data revealed strange temperature shifts and massive, unexplainable water currents coming from deep trenches. Even more disturbing, sonar scans detected enormous, unidentified moving objects in these regions. The pattern suggested something was forcing marine life upward, something far beyond human understanding. Was it an undiscovered sea creature? Or was there an environmental catastrophe unfolding deep below? Governments began to take notice. Japan, the EU, and Norway sent naval teams to investigate. But the deeper they explored, the more their equipment failed. Submarines lost communication, sonar systems glitched, and deep-sea cameras returned blurry, distorted images. Whatever was happening in the ocean, it wasn't just biological. It was something beyond science. As panic grew, the question remained, were humans ready to face what was coming? In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a research vessel named Neptune Explorer ventured into one of the affected zones. The crew, made up of experienced marine biologists and naval officers, prepared for a deep-sea dive. Their mission was simple: deploy drones to scan the area and collect data on what was driving the creatures to the surface. But as soon as they lowered their deep-sea cameras, the screens flickered with static. A low-frequency hum filled their radio channels, growing louder by the second. Then the feed returned. But what they saw sent chills down their spines. The screen showed a massive, swirling vortex in the depths. Around it, thousands of deep-sea creatures swam erratically, as if caught in an invisible current. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. Within the vortex something moved. A shadow, colossal, shifting, alive. It was impossible to determine its exact shape, but the sheer size of it was undeniable. Before anyone could react, a sudden force pulled at the drone, dragging it deeper. The screen went black. The Neptune Explorer crew exchanged horrified glances. This was no ordinary ocean disturbance. Something was waking up beneath them. The ship's alarms blared as the ocean's surface became violently unstable. Waves crashed against the vessel, and a deep, guttural sound echoed through the water. It wasn't the sound of the wind or the tides. It was something alive. The crew had no choice. They abandoned the mission and sent an emergency signal to the mainland. Something ancient, something unknown, had stirred in the depths, and for the first time in history, humanity had heard its voice. The emergency signal from Neptune Explorer reached naval bases and research centers worldwide. Scientists reviewed the distorted footage, analyzing the eerie shadow and the vortex pulling marine life upward. But government officials hesitated. Announcing an unknown oceanic threat could cause mass panic. Some dismissed it as a deep-sea current anomaly, while others suspected a military experiment gone wrong. But Dr. Amelia Carter knew better. She had spent years studying deep-sea ecosystems, and nothing in nature explained what they had seen. This wasn't a natural event, it was an awakening. In coastal towns across the world, strange occurrences intensified. Fishermen reported empty nets. Entire schools of fish had vanished overnight. Beaches were littered with deep-sea creatures gasping for air. In Norway, a naval submarine patrolling the Atlantic Trench mysteriously lost contact. When search teams arrived, all they found was the empty vessel floating aimlessly, its hull covered in deep, claw-like gashes. The crew had vanished without a trace. Yet, despite these alarming signs, world leaders remained silent. If something monstrous lurked in the ocean, what could they do about it? Then came the final warning. In Japan, a coastal town experienced a mini-tsunami, but there had been no earthquake to trigger it. Locals reported hearing an unearthly, low-frequency sound vibrating through the waves just moments before. Fishermen refused to go to sea, and elders whispered about an ancient legend, a force that slumbered deep beneath the ocean, only to rise when disturbed. Amelia and her team pieced the clues together, but before they could act, the worst was yet to come. The deep-sea creatures weren't just running anymore. They were screaming for help. A month after the Neptune Explorer incident, satellite images revealed something terrifying. Deep-sea trenches around the world were expanding. The Mariana Trench, the deepest point on Earth, showed unusual seismic activity. The ocean floor was shifting, cracking open as if something massive was moving beneath it. Scientists argued it could be tectonic activity, but Amelia knew better. It wasn't just one location. These fractures were appearing in multiple places at the same time. Something was pushing from below, something that didn't belong to human history. Meanwhile, in the Indian Ocean, a cargo ship sent out a distress call before vanishing without a trace. Its last radio message was chilling. "The water, it's alive, it's watching us." Search teams found no wreckage, no oil spills, just silence. But fishermen along the African coast started noticing strange patterns. The ocean currents had changed overnight, moving in unpredictable directions. Some claimed to have seen giant, shadowy figures gliding beneath their boats. The governments remained silent, but online people were starting to connect the dots. Something was waking up beneath the waves. Then, the first undeniable proof came. A deep-sea drone deployed near the Pacific captured clear footage of a moving object, a living entity, hundreds of meters long, slipping through the trenches like a ghost. Its body pulsed with bioluminescence, and its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed like burning embers. Amelia's heart pounded as she watched the footage. This wasn't a lost species. This was something ancient, something the world had never seen before. And the worst part? It wasn't alone. The world remained unaware of the horror unfolding beneath the waves, but those who worked at sea could feel it. Fishermen refused to sail at night, claiming the ocean had changed. Its rhythm was unnatural, its silence too deep. In the Caribbean, a group of divers exploring a coral reef encountered something unexplainable. The water around them turned murky, vibrating with an eerie hum. Then, a massive shadow moved above them, blocking out the sunlight. When they surfaced, their boat was gone. Search teams found no trace of them. The only thing left behind was their underwater camera, which recorded a single blurry image, an enormous, glowing eye staring back at them. Amelia and her team worked day and night, analyzing every clue, every sighting. What terrified them most was the pattern. The creatures rising to the surface weren't just fleeing randomly. They were being driven out, forced to abandon their homes. And now, something else was taking their place. The trenches were no longer empty. Unidentified life forms, massive in scale, were emerging from the cracks in the ocean floor. Were they predators? Or were they something worse? Beings that had always been there, hidden, waiting for the right moment to return. Then came the first attack. Off the coast of Chile, a fishing trawler vanished overnight. Survivors, found days later drifting in a lifeboat, spoke in whispers, their faces pale with terror. "It wasn't a storm," one of them muttered. "The sea itself swallowed us." When Amelia's team reviewed satellite images from that night, their blood ran cold. The ship's final moments had been captured from space. A dark, serpentine shape, larger than the vessel itself, had risen from the water, then disappeared beneath the waves, dragging the ship with it. The ocean was no longer safe. The disappearances increased. Fishing boats, cargo ships, even military submarines, gone without a trace. Coastal towns reported strange vibrations coming from the sea, deep sounds that made the earth tremble. Birds abandoned their nesting grounds near the water, flying inland in panic. Something was shifting beneath the ocean, and it wasn't just affecting marine life anymore. The world was beginning to notice, but by the time governments reacted, it was already too late. In Indonesia, an entire fishing village woke up to a terrifying sight. The shoreline had moved overnight. The sea had receded, pulling back farther than anyone had ever seen. It wasn't a tsunami warning, it was something else. The ground beneath the waves looked disturbed, as if something enormous had passed through it. When a group of locals ventured out to investigate, they never returned. Their last message over the radio was a scream, cut off by static. Hours later, the ocean rushed back violently, swallowing the land and everything on it. Amelia and her team pieced together the clues, their fear growing with every new report. The ocean wasn't just shifting randomly, it was reacting. Something deep beneath was altering the balance of the entire marine ecosystem. The cracks in the trenches, the mass migrations, the disappearances, it all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. The deep-sea creatures weren't just rising because they were fleeing, they were being replaced. Something ancient, something powerful, was taking back the ocean. And if it continued, humanity would no longer be safe on land either. Panic spread as more coastal cities experienced bizarre events. In California, beaches were closed indefinitely after strange tides pulled swimmers out to sea, never to be seen again. In Norway, seismic sensors picked up deep, rhythmic movements, something colossal shifting beneath the ocean floor. And in the Philippines, entire schools of fish turned up dead overnight, their bodies untouched, as if something had drained the life from them. The governments could no longer deny it. The ocean was no longer behaving like the ocean. It was responding to something awakening. Amelia Carter stood before a panel of world leaders, presenting the terrifying data. "We are not dealing with an ordinary ecological event," she warned. "This is an invasion, not from above, but from below." Skeptics laughed at her, dismissing the idea of unknown creatures reclaiming the ocean. But their laughter didn't last long. The very next day, a massive oil rig in the Atlantic disappeared. Satellites captured its final moments. An enormous, shadowy appendage wrapping around the structure, pulling it under in seconds. The world finally believed. But belief was not enough. Navies from multiple countries deployed fleets into the oceans, armed with sonar, explosives, and deep-sea drones. Their mission: locate and neutralize whatever was lurking below. But Amelia knew it was a mistake. "You can't fight the ocean," she whispered as she watched warships head into the unknown. "You can only hope it lets you live." The first attack was coming, and humanity was walking straight into it. The world held its breath as warships patrolled the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, scanning for the unseen enemy. Sonar picked up strange readings, massive, moving objects that defied classification. Some were hundreds of meters long, slipping through the depths like ghosts. Others appeared and disappeared in seconds, as if they were aware they were being hunted. The tension was unbearable. Then, the first strike came. A U-destroyer stationed near the Bermuda Triangle sent out a distress signal. "Something is beneath us. It's..." The transmission cut off. Satellite footage showed the ship tilting violently before vanishing under the waves. No wreckage, no survivors, just silence. Minutes later, a second vessel suffered the same fate. Panic spread across the fleets. They weren't fighting a single creature. They were up against an intelligence that understood them. The ocean was no longer a battleground. It was a trap. Amelia Carter, watching from a naval command center, gripped the table. "They're not attacking randomly," she realized. "They're testing us." The creatures weren't mindless beasts. They were calculating, strategic. They had waited for centuries, hidden in the deepest trenches, watching humans take over their world. And now, they were taking it back. The fleets had no choice. They fired torpedoes, depth charges, and sonar blasts into the abyss. Explosions lit up the ocean, but when the smoke cleared, the water remained still. Then, the ocean itself roared in response. A wave, higher than any seen before, rushed toward the ships. The first battle had begun, but humanity had already lost. The battle in the oceans raged on, but humanity was losing ground. The military fleets, armed with the most advanced weaponry, found themselves helpless against the creatures from the depths. Every attack was met with swift retaliation. The creatures didn't just survive, they adapted. With each strike, they learned more about human technology and countered with terrifying efficiency. Submarines, once the pride of naval forces, were now being taken out by an unseen force. Communications were cut, and equipment failed as if the ocean itself was fighting back. In the midst of this chaos, Amelia Carter and her team uncovered a shocking discovery. The creatures weren't just returning to reclaim their home. They were orchestrating a larger plan. They had been communicating with each other in ways humans couldn't understand. But they weren't alone. Beneath the surface, something else was guiding them. Something even older and more powerful. It wasn't just the deep-sea creatures rising. It was the awakening of an ancient, sentient force tied to the very heart of the Earth's oceans. The world's governments scrambled to respond, but panic was beginning to take hold. The ocean was no longer just a body of water. It was a battlefield. And every time humanity tried to fight back, the creatures adapted faster, pushing their way toward the surface, reclaiming the land as their own. Nations turned their sights on coastal cities, evacuating millions as they prepared for what seemed inevitable, the rise of the ocean itself. It was no longer about survival. It was about whether humanity could coexist with what had always existed beneath their feet. The tide had truly turned. As the war between humanity and the deep-sea creatures escalated, desperation began to set in. Cities along the coastlines were evacuated, and military forces prepared for the worst. Yet, amidst the growing chaos, Amelia Carter refused to give up on a peaceful resolution. While most believed the ocean was beyond saving, she was convinced that the creatures weren't inherently violent. They were simply trying to reclaim their world. But how could she communicate with beings that had never been part of human history? How could they bridge the gap between two completely different species? Two worlds that had never met until now. Amelia proposed a bold idea, a mission to enter the depths of the ocean and attempt communication with the creatures. The world's leaders scoffed at the idea, seeing it as nothing more than a desperate attempt to avoid confrontation. But Amelia believed it was the only chance for survival. A team of scientists and diplomats was formed, tasked with developing technology capable of withstanding the crushing depths. The mission wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding the ancient force that had awakened beneath the waves. Could they find a way to coexist with the ocean's forgotten rulers? The team descended into the trenches aboard a specially designed submersible, their hearts racing as they ventured deeper than any human had ever gone before. The pressure was immense, the darkness overwhelming, but they pressed on. Amelia's theory was simple. If the ocean was truly sentient, perhaps it could recognize their intent. But as the submersible descended past the deepest trenches, a strange hum filled the vessel. The ocean seemed to be waiting. It was then that they encountered something no human had ever witnessed, an ancient, colossal figure, a being so vast that its very presence shook the ocean floor. The creatures of the deep circled it, as though paying homage. They had found the source, and now, the real challenge would begin. As the team hovered in the abyss, the massive figure before them pulsed with an otherworldly glow. It was not one creature, but a conglomeration of thousands. Its form was ever-shifting, an ethereal being that seemed to exist in both time and space. As if the ocean itself had taken a shape. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the submersible, not through the speakers but directly in their minds. It wasn't a sound, it was a presence, a consciousness. Amelia felt the weight of the ocean's memory press upon her. She could feel its ancient grief, its fury, and its yearning for freedom. The deep sea was not just a place. It was a living entity. The creatures surrounding the massive figure suddenly fell still, as if waiting for something. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was suffocating. Then, a voice echoed through their minds, deep, reverberating, and ancient. Asterisk. Why have you come? Asterisk. The words were not spoken aloud, but felt. It was as though the ocean itself was reaching out to them. Amelia, her voice trembling, responded. We come not to fight, but to understand. The creatures you send to the surface, the changes in the ocean. It's a call, isn't it? A call for help. The voice paused, as if considering her words. Asterisk. You have awakened what you should not have. We are the guardians of the deep. Your kind has disturbed the balance, taking what you cannot return. Now, the balance must be restored. Asterisk. Amelia's heart raced. This was no enemy. They were the stewards of the ocean, protectors of a world that had been forgotten. They were not rising out of aggression. They were rising because they had no other choice. But the question remained, could they restore the balance before it was too late? The tension was unbearable as the ocean's voice filled their minds. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of their situation. The creatures were not just fighting to survive. They were fighting to preserve a world that humanity had never fully understood. Their world, the ocean, in its endless depth, was more than just a collection of water. It was a living, breathing entity that had been silently guarding the planet's balance for millennia. But now, that balance had been disrupted. Amelia turned to her team, knowing that this wasn't just about saving humanity anymore. It was about saving the planet from itself. The voice continued, asterisk. You have overstepped, and your greed has awakened us. Now you must choose. Leave the ocean alone, return what has been taken, and restore the balance. Or, continue to fight, and witness the destruction of your world. Asterisk. The message was clear. The creatures had been driven to act only because humanity had overexploited the oceans, draining its resources, polluting its waters, and destroying the very ecosystems that had once thrived in harmony. The creatures weren't just defending themselves. They were defending the Earth's future. If humans didn't change their ways, the ocean would reclaim what it had lost, and the consequences would be catastrophic. Amelia and her team struggled with the weight of the decision. The world above was in chaos. Governments had already begun planning retaliation against the ocean, sending more military forces to engage the creatures. But now, Amelia understood the true cost of their actions. This wasn't a battle that could be won with weapons. It had to be won with understanding and respect. The creatures had risen because they had no other choice. But it wasn't too late to change the course of history. The question was, would humanity listen? Would they have the wisdom to act before it was too late? The choice was theirs. The world was at a crossroads. Back on the surface, the situation had grown dire. Coastal cities were being swallowed by the rising tide, and military forces were preparing for a final showdown with the creatures of the deep. News outlets broadcast images of sinking ships, devastated coasts, and angry protests demanding retaliation. Humanity was teetering on the edge of total destruction, and yet, deep in the heart of the ocean, Amelia Carter and her team faced a different reality. They had learned the truth. The creatures weren't enemies. They were a part of the Earth's heartbeat. But could they convince the world? Amelia knew that the mission couldn't be completed with just words. The choice had to come from humanity as a whole. In a desperate plea, she broadcasted a live message to the world. We are on the brink of losing everything. Not because of nature, but because of us. We've forgotten that we're not masters of this world. We're guests. The ocean, the creatures beneath the waves, they are not our enemies. They are our reminder that we must change, or we risk destroying everything we hold dear. Her words echoed across the globe, a plea for understanding in a time of crisis. But the response was mixed. Some rallied behind her, while others demanded action. The pressure to retaliate was immense. In the end, the turning point came from an unlikely source. A coalition of nations, pressured by the growing environmental crises, finally agreed to halt all military operations and instead focus on restoring the balance with the ocean. The process wouldn't be easy. There would be no overnight solution, but it was a start. The oceans began to heal, slowly but surely. The creatures that had once risen in fury now returned to their depths, and the coastline, though scarred, began to stabilize. Humanity had made its choice, not to fight the ocean, but to live with it. And as the dust settled, Amelia whispered to herself. It's not the end, it's the beginning. The ocean, once again, held the power. But now, humanity knew better than to forget its lessons. Only by respecting the depths of the earth could they hope to survive. And perhaps, in that understanding, they would find a future where both worlds could coexist in harmony. In a world filled with turmoil, the greatest lesson came not from war, but from understanding. The creatures of the deep, the ocean itself, its power had always been there, waiting. But only when humanity chose to listen, to learn, did they realize the true strength of coexistence. The ocean is not just a place, it's a reminder. We must learn to respect what lies beneath, not conquer it. The power of understanding, not force, is what will shape our future. Will we listen before it's too late?